Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and serve M&A as the Director of Ecosystem Development. When Webster defines the word network as a noun, it tells us that a network is an interconnected or interrelated chain, group, or system. It's a system of computers and peripherals that communicate with each other. Another definition says a group of radio or television stations linked by wire or radio relay, a term mostly used just by boomers now, I think. And then informally, an interconnected group or association of persons. Well, the term network is often heard in the PCA when discussing church planting. There are some 24 such entities in the PCA today whose primary focus is to create church planting movements in their region. Larry Hoop, writing for ByFaith, the magazine, the PCA, wrote an article entitled Church Planting Networks, a Key Role in the PCA's Growth Strategy. That article is online as of today and will be sent out soon via email. So I thought it was good to discuss church planting networks with Larry and a panel of planting practitioners. Well, let me introduce to you our panel for today. Larry Hoop is the Church and Presbytery Relations Representative for the Administrative Committee. He was senior pastor at Colfax Center in Holland, Iowa for 24 years. He's the stated clerk of the Ohio Valley Presbytery and presently the supply pastor at Wheat Ridge EPC in Ohio. Drew Bennett is the senior pastor at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Winter Haven, Florida, and the executive director of the Florida Church Planting Network. And also, Paul Hahn is the interim pastor at Pacific Crossroads Church in Los Angeles. Having served as the coordinator of M&A for several years, and he was instrumental in starting two networks, the Southwest and the Tennessee Valley Church Planting Networks. Well, before we jump in, let me just start off by saying this is meant to be a conversation. And so we invite you to ask questions using the chat box or the Q&A feature with Zoom, because we want you to be a part of this, and so we can have this conversation together. And so, Larry, give us a little brief summary of the article, maybe a teaser. So when we see it, we'll want to click on and read it. And maybe as you talk about what sparked your interest, what was the biggest surprise you found as you were doing your work?
Well, thanks, Chris. Basically what we do in the article is we look primarily at geographically based networks. Not all of these networks are geographically based. Some are affinity groups and so on. But we looked at a number of those, a sample, not all of them. We couldn't get all of them. And basically, you get a thumbnail of these various networks. So I think the article provides what I would characterize as a diving board. It kind of gets you into what's happening with these church planting networks across the PCA. And secondly, it's sort of a buffet. If you want to see a network develop in your particular area, it shows a lot of ways that's being done across our denomination. Now, in terms of things that really my own interest, I've been interested in M&A for many years. I spent 19 years on our M&A committee when I was in Iowa, and so I've had a great interest in that. And also, I was involved in the start of one of these networks, the Great Plains Network. I wasn't the main initiator, but I was sort of assisting with it. So I've had interest in networks for some time. The things that struck me most in preparing this article was for one thing, there's just been an explosion of these networks. I would say in the past decade or so. Most of them have really had their origin during that time period. It's been a grassroots phenomena. Nobody from Atlanta says to a group of people, "Hey, you ought to start a network here, a church planting network." Rather, it's the initiative comes locally. That's kind of in keeping with how the PCA operates, and because of that, the networks are very different in the way they approach their philosophy, their approach, and it's very adjusted to the local situation, and they're very flexible. Several of the networks have been around a while, have sort of reinvented themselves. That's another thing that kind of surprised me, I guess you could say. one of the things I discovered is that because they're local, a lot of times people in one part of the country don't know what is happening with the network in the other part of the country. So it'd be great, perhaps, I think we could have a little bit more interaction and cross-pollination with them. But those are some of the things I noted. And the other thing I noted is that even though these aren't formal, they're not a formal organization like a presbytery. The presbytery is set up by the Book of Church Order. It's part of our national denominational structure. These are not exactly that, but they are very Presbyterian because they're involved in connecting people to do ministry, and that struck me as I prepared the article. So those would be the things that I point out.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And, so maybe just starting with a little bit of history, as well as I understand, the Southwest Church Planting Network was one of the first ones that really was recognized. That was started when, in 98, I believe?
97, 98.
Yeah. So, Paul, you were part of that. I think you were just 17 at the time. You were a young man then. So tell us give us a little history, background. Why did it start? How did it start? And what happened?
Chris, thanks for hosting us today and having us on. So appreciate that. I think you got to take one step back in general before you do anything specifically and kind of think about the people in our part of the church that laid the foundations for this. So Terry Geiger and Alan Thompson and John Smed really promoting cutting edge ideas about not just assessing church planters, but beginning to build movements. Fred Marsh involved with them. And then, the next era with Jim Bland and Ted Powers, and Fred was still part of that, in sort of really making a decision that if we keep doing all of our church planting from a centralized base in Atlanta with everything happening there, we're going to be very, very limited. So Jim Bland and his tenure and his M&A coordinator, Ted Powers with him as church planting coordinator, really pressed these things down and out. So I think that's important. And then for us in Texas, we planted Redeemer Austin as the first daughter church of Park Cities in 94. And right away, Skip and Brad Bradley, a key lay leader at Park Cities, began talking with us. It's not just enough that we're planting these churches in Austin or in Houston. We need to have a whole movement, and we want the churches you're building and you're growing to be a part of this movement. We want multiplication to be in your DNA from the very early chapters of your church's life. That was something I didn't catch well as an early church planter, that I'm not just trying to establish a congregation, but I'm an outpost of the kingdom, and I'm a part of this broader movement of the gospel going out, there in Austin or in Knoxville, and from there to the whole world. So Southwest Network really gets started out of the vision of Skip Ryan, movement leader and senior pastor Brad Bradley alongside him. Bill Thomas has come in behind Brad Bradley in the years since. We've had some great leaders in that movement. Tom Gibbs has been a great leader there. Ricky Jones has been a great leader there. Blake Altman has been a great leader there. I know I'm leaving names out, but from the beginning, there was a humility mixed with a spirit of creativity at Park Cities to say, we don't want to just do our thing. We want to help our daughters and other churches get caught up in a movement, and we're going to share that movement and share in it together, even in its governance and its direction. And let's share more broadly, even with the presbyteries, to officially connect in. We sort of used the RUF model to do that. And then there was creativity in saying, we're going to plant RUFs as well as churches in this whole region from the very beginning. So the Southwest Network's been an amazing story. It's been wonderful.
Good. That's great. Well, thank you. Drew, you're the executor of the Florida network, which is when we look at these networks, Southwest and Florida seem to be among the largest, church networks and church planting movements in that sense. So tell us a little bit about Florida. You've been in this position 3-4 years, has it been?
Yeah, a couple of years.
But but been engaged with it for quite.
I was on the board. Yeah, I served on the board for a long time before that, and kind of was there. I was planting as some of these ideas were being thrown around, and then some of our training that we were doing was kind of the seed for the Florida network as it was birthed. So Florida, there's 6 presbyteries just in the state of Florida. One of those is down in the southeast part of the state where Spanish River is, and then down Miami and all of that. And of course, Spanish River has such a long history and wonderful legacy of church planting. So they're kind of doing their own thing and have been for a long time. And then the Panhandle portion of the state is actually part of Gulf Coast Presbytery, I believe. But the entire rest of the state, 4 presbyteries: North Florida Presbytery, Central Florida Presbytery, which is from the East Coast all the way across to the West Coast, Southwest Florida Presbytery, which is where I am here in the interior part of the state, over to the Tampa St. Pete area, and then there's Suncoast Presbytery, which is down the West Coast from the Bradenton, Sarasota area all the way down past Naples and Fort Myers. Mm-hmm. So it's a large geographical area. The network itself was really patterned after the Southwest network. I mean, when Ed McDougall kind of led the effort to get the network going, that was the thought. And so there are approximately 45 member churches from those 4 presbyteries that together make up the network. A member church is a church that commits to giving a certain portion of tithes and offerings from the previous year to the network, which that money is then collected. There's a budget that's drawn up, and then I oversee that. And so we take in about around $400,000 a year that we're able to then invest in church planting, but not only giving directly to church planters, but to apprenticeships that are being done by churches within the network to help fund those, and even now internships and things further upstream to try to create a good pipeline for church planters in the future. So that's our network.
Yeah.
So I think that last piece Drew shared about the pipeline building, about spending your money not just on planters or apprentices or plants, but that pipeline building, you have been huge on that in Wisconsin and more broadly with M&A. I just think that's the secret to the future in a lot of ways, in so many ways. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. No, I'm hosting. I also have a vested interest in this. Obviously, I have a vested interest in all the conversations I do, but the Wisconsin network started about 5 years ago. And what makes us a little different is that the presbytery and the network, it's one and the same. And so you can almost kind of begs the question, why have a network? It's your M&A committee. Well, the network was formed out of a need that we saw, and that was it was finding church planters and developing leaders. And it was our recognition, being in Wisconsin, that we had to do a lot more home growing of our planters and of our pastors and the whole thing. So wanting to create a pipeline of having indigenous leaders, well, that's not really M&A's task of making, getting them through the whole pipeline. And it's really not the credentialing process either. And so we started the network. And so that we went from, in 2017, having our first group of 4 guys start the program. We now have 25 guys who are preparing for ministry in Wisconsin. And we're just now beginning to ordain the first batch, if you will, to be able to serve in Wisconsin. A lot of them, a few of them, they'll be church planters, but we need leaders, ministry leaders across the board. And the other thing, and I think you mentioned it already with a few of these, one of the common characteristics, I think, in the healthy networks is the leadership apart from the teaching elders. Us teaching elders are a wonderful lot, except we sometimes have the organizational skills of Jello. And I would say in Wisconsin, having a ruling elder head up our M&A committee and lead the charge in this, Mark Kaiser, it's made it phenomenal, because he has the strategic thinking and the ability to make things operate and to keep that herd of feral cats in check when we're in a meeting.
Hey,
So,
Chris,
yeah.
since we're given a broad sense of the networks, I mean, I should have said, I just wanted to make sure, so I'm a part of the Florida Church Planting Network, which is a big territory, but also I'm a part of a church planting movement that was a movement before it was a network, but that has since become a network that makes up just one county in the interior of the state of Florida. And so there's about 750,000 people in our county, and one church that had a vision for church planting has become 9 churches. And so again, so as we think about the range of church planting networks, I mean, there's the big networks, and then there's a network that exists in the middle of the state of Florida that's literally just one county of churches. So
yeah, and this is what I find fascinating. You know, when I started hearing about networks, this is how a network is done, and that's, they led the charge. But Paul, as you had mentioned, they were creative in the way they did it. What's fascinating is to see this ongoing creativity. Yes. So, what you're talking about is you have a network within a network.
Right.
So the Florida network is not proprietary that you must follow, the mothership. It's okay. You can form a micro or a macro, or a micro inside of a macro.
Yeah. And for us, really, it was a necessity because if you look at Florida, Polk County, you would not look at the state of Florida with Tampa and St. Pete and Orlando and Jacksonville and these places and conclude, oh, we need to plant a bunch of churches in Mulberry and Bartow and very small municipalities. But that was our dream. And we realized the network as it existed was not going to be able to fund churches at the pace that we wanted to do it, and probably couldn't in good conscience prioritize some of the places that we wanted to go. So we put together our own network inside the network, so we didn't have to be worried about that stuff.
And who wouldn't want to plant in Polk County, Florida? So
there you go.
Come on, that's where I'm from as well. I would just say there, Chris, a point that's important, and we talk about this a lot with M&A, MTW as well, is, every church needs to have that sense of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. And, what these churches like in Lakeland and Winter Haven, Florida have done is, okay, we've got our Jerusalem right here, this part of our town, but we've got Judea in this county, and we want to reach this county, and we want a whole movement of this county. And so there's all kinds of creative things they do at that level with ministerial connectivity, helping each other with preaching and prayer movements and lay leadership movements and faith and work movements. Then you get to your Samaria with, the Florida network, and then you're more into the ends of the earth with M&A and MTW as a whole. So I think that kind of layering is so important for every church. It's interesting too, in my role as M&A coordinator, what I saw beyond our denomination, even when you go to events like with Ed Stetzer and these other things more broadly, you see key leaders like Drew or like you, Chris, that are involved at these multiple levels, local, regional, more broadly regional, national, international, and they're wearing these different hats. They have this kind of verticality about their ministries. And I think it's just important for us all to sort of say, how do I have my connection points, even as an individual Christian, with Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth kinds of things. So,
no, that's good. Yeah, I think we're beginning to see kind of one of the next phases. We'll talk about this a little bit more later too, but is moving from networks in somewhat we're seeing in the Midwest to a Midwest alliance. The alliance is not a network, but it is bringing Great Plains, Wisconsin, Bluegrass together in just helping to keep thinking creatively and managing resources and talent in a more productive fashion.
And you have somebody like Ted Powers with massive experience, helping to lead that, and board people like yourself and others, Stu Kearns, others, giving that kind of leadership at that level. I mean, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's basically what I was talking about in terms of the need for collaboration. There's tremendous local creativity and energy being expended, I think, and to have something like the Midwest Alliance help us to to marshal some of those things together is, I think that is a next step that we need to be thinking about.
Good. Let me just ask for those that are attending, if you would, just put in the chat box, are you aware, is your church presbytery region part of a network? If so, just put in the chat box which networks that we have also listening in with us. When we're done with this webcast, I'll send out a link for this video. You can share it with others to keep the conversation going. But I'll also be sending at least all of the networks that I could find in the PCA, and you'll have a long list and a link to all their various websites and such. That's great. So yeah, fill that in. What do we have? Rocky Mountain and Western. Okay, yeah, Rocky Mountain is part of the Western Church Planting Network. Okay, yep, Brian. With
Rocky Mountain's another example of great creativity there, in that they so have seen by experience how important it is for people to acclimatize themselves to place and culture and learn. So, you might be a very experienced church planter, like some of us on this screen. I guess all of us have been involved in church planting, but they would want you to come in and sort of do some time in an apprenticing kind of way, maybe not so much on ministry skills, but on place and knowing a place. And that's a very creative step they've taken.
Yeah.
It's borne good fruit.
Yeah, the understanding of, again, we there's a lot of training and such we can do on a large level, of national level, if you will, but the culture aspect of place and understanding that, one of the things we're seeing more and more now with assessment when it comes to this is it's becoming more regionalized, and they're not directly tied into the networks, but they have some of that same ethos. So we had down in Lakeland. And we had a number of folk from the Florida Church Planting Network participating in it as candidates and as assessors as well. Steve Stanton says the pipeline part is key for us too, since there aren't many people in the PCA in with Western roots. Yeah, I think that's a critical one. If I recall, Steve's in Colorado Springs, I think out in Colorado area. Chris, so yeah, that's critical. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So excuse me, Chris, could you talk about that, like just the little vignette that you often do about, we tried to get people to come to Wisconsin. Nobody really wanted to come to Wisconsin. So you made a shift early on, and it's just bearing so much fruit now. Could you talk about that?
I mean, a great example here on the screen back. Drew, you started in 2005 out of Trinity.
That's right.
That's when Wisconsin formed as a presbytery. We didn't exist in the PCA as a presbytery until then, but around that time we try to recruit guys. I looked for a church planter on the north side of Milwaukee for a good 6-7 years. We flew in 3 couples, we wine dined them, did everything we could, and they all said, I came to Milwaukee reluctantly because it felt like the end of the earth. But we kind of liked it. And actually the place we were calling them to was church planter, hip, cool, sexy, great restaurants and bike paths, and you're right on the lake, but nobody came. We found a great church planter. John Talley's done a great job, but there's the enculturation aspect, the number of years it does take to learn the culture. And so we recognized if we were going to call Drew Bennett from Florida come to Wisconsin, Drew, how long would you have listened to me give you a pitch to move to Wisconsin to plant?
You wouldn't even gotten that far. I don't think.
I wouldn't. You wouldn't have even answered the email. You wouldn't have picked up the phone. And so the reality is Wisconsin is its own culture. We recognize we've got couples in our state who sense a call to ministry, but they don't really feel like leaving Wisconsin. Believe it or not. There's good reasons to live in Wisconsin, Packers being one of them. So we started this whole program, and it's been amazing. Almost barely a month goes by do I not get a call from a member of one of our churches, a young man who says, I really sense a call to ministry. How can I do this and not leave the church that I love, that I'm serving, I feel called to, but I can prepare and serve here, get ordained, go out and plant, come on staff. So it's almost every month to get a call, and every other month a new person enters our program.
So you're doing a verticality, not just personally with these kind of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth kind of things, or the movements, but you're doing a verticality as a movement with engaging people in middle school and in high school and encouraging youth ministers to talk about church planting. And you're helping people get trained and stay where they are in a cohort model, in a long college kind of model, using LAMP or using seminary programs. And that beautiful creativity. It just reminds me also of all these networks have so much creativity. You know, how the Southwest has this major interconnection with campus ministry, with RUF, Bluegrass Network. Larry's been connected with them. They have this amazing interconnectivity, with campus ministry. Primarily it's campus outreach, and Tate's Creek is there yet this big anchor church, but they're not being a big gorilla, like they're sharing all of this. And, Will and Marshall and Robert are sharing all of this. And it's beautiful. And it's got all that connectivity. What Perimeter has done, Bob Cargo, Tom Wood before him, really pivoting from building a collegial set of churches to then, sort of saying, we're going to equip and we're going to empower and we're going to train. And then we're going to send these people out from that. I mean, there's so many ways to do this, and they're all good,
Yeah, but Larry, in the research you did, what were there any other innovative or kind of exciting things you saw that was?
I think the most exciting thing I saw was just really what Paul has alluded to, and that is the way that different networks have approached the kind of things they're doing. For instance, North Texas developed this sort of inter-presbytery. They act as a subcommittee of the presbytery, and they're very involved in hands-on kind of getting the churches planted and so on. But you go to the Metro Atlanta what is it? It's Metro Atlanta
Collective, MAC.
Collective, that's the word. Yep, MAC. I know it's MAC. I just couldn't think of the C right off the hand. And their whole thing is to develop a sort of a greenhouse where they connect people to resources and do a lot of training. They don't fund church plants directly, as some of the other networks do. So you're seeing what I see is just all of these different places are doing something a little bit different. You mentioned Bluegrass. They have a very particular vision. Their vision is to plant churches in college towns in central and eastern Kentucky. That's what they're trying to do. And it's based on, number one, who their people are. They've got a lot of these, as you mentioned, campus outreach and other campus ministers. And there's also a number of university towns that's sort of a key in Kentucky. So they're thinking locally and trying to be as creative as they can to do that. And they're developing, just like you're talking about, Chris, in Wisconsin, they're developing a local pipeline using these guys that are already involved in campus ministry, training them on site, and then releasing them.
And so, again, when we talk about networks, it usually is church planting network. And that's kind of how it got started, the impetus, and that's great and vital. But it's also sounding like a lot of these are beginning to morph and see other opportunities that are part of planting, but wouldn't necessarily be immediately thinking planting.
That's exactly right. They're doing so many different things. I mean, this couldn't happen. I think what Paul alluded to is that shift we had in M&A, 30 years ago, where we moved from centralized to M&A National being a resource for things that are happening locally on the ground. I think that was just that's really the change that the seed that planted a lot of these things. You had local creative people who took the initiative from that.
And that really was Jim Bland and Ted Powers and Fred Marsh. They had courage and wisdom to say, we're not going to try to hang on to this and clutch this. I mean, the basic principle of the incarnation, right? The humility of Christ, like in Philippians 2, we're giving away, we're sharing out. And I think that's sometimes the hard thing for M&A is, like, well, what are we doing? Well, they're behind and in and through, woven into all of this, but it's that they've got their DNA in so much of this, but it's not proprietary. And I think, that's important to get beyond the PCA. Even when you read research at Stetzer, Tom Wood, Alan Thompson, Steve Childers, the cruciality of even getting beyond our tribe and interconnecting, and you talked, Larry, cross-pollinating, even beyond denominations. Drew, you guys in Polk have planted at least one non-PCA church out of the network, right?
Yeah, the Polk network has. I mean, the Florida network is very tied in with the presbyteries, and so we are only planting PCA churches.
Yeah.
Just out of out of the sense of that's what the presbyteries would prefer. But our local network, we helped plant an Acts 29 Reformed Baptistic church.
Yeah,
we did. And I wanted to say to what we're talking about. I mean, I want not to be on the other side. I mean, even what we've learned is that there are just so many opportunities that there's also a need to not. I mean, we're fighting almost in the opposite direction to say no. Like for here in Florida, the context, people ask me, where can I plant a church? And my answer is, where can you not plant a church in a state? 1,000 people a day are moving to our state of 24 million people. And, we just are playing. We're so behind. We're playing catch ups. I mean, you literally could just do kind of this number here and put your finger on the map, and I can send you there to plant a church, because we need churches everywhere. And because there's just such a need to really be doing evangelism, where in Florida's not south. The further south you go in Florida, the further north you're going culturally. So in best case scenario, maybe 15% of populations are churched in any sense. And so it's a high number of just non-Christians, and so we need to be so aggressively doing evangelism and church planting that we're having to kind of resist, pushing into all these other things, to just keep saying, no, we're a church planting network. Churches have given us money towards their desire for to see churches planted. And so if we're going to fund other things, we've got to figure out how we can sell what we're doing, just draw the connections between, okay, if we take this initiative, it's going to have this payoff in church planting, because we're so jealous to guard that sense of really the single focus of trying to plant churches.
But doesn't that illustrate the whole thing we're talking about, is how local conditions direct you as to what you're trying to do?
That's right.
Yeah. Mark Lowry was so good, the founder of RUF, so good at saying to us early campus ministers, we're going to give you principles and constructs, but every situation is different, and you need to learn to exegete not just scripture, but your place and your time and your people. And I think that's what Drew's doing really well. I mean, Chris, my other church planting experience in terms of a network, you talked about in the beginning of Tennessee Valley, exegeting that moment was very different for us, because I was coming to the end of my time, sensed a strong sense that I was finishing my plant in Knoxville and didn't know what the Lord had next. And the Lord ended up really guiding us to work with the presbytery. And they said, Paul, would you help us start a network like the Southwest Network? And I said, I don't feel called to that. And I don't think that's what we should do. I think what we just need to start doing is planting some churches and connecting that with church renewal and revitalization. And so I was sort of hired to catalyze that. Ted Strawbridge came in behind me when I went to work for M&A denominationally. And so where we had gained one net church in like 12 or 13 years, they have now 7 or 8 church plants in the ground. And that's really the fomenting of this movement. Hutch Garmany has been such a key leader there for that Presbytery M&A chairman pressing this. And now they're planting a Native American church. They're planting some multi-ethnic churches. They're planting suburban churches, rural churches. You can almost look at Tennessee Valley and say this is a little snapshot of what we want to be doing everywhere. But that still doesn't have bylaws and stuff, because like I'm one of those Jello guys that can't, organize my kitchen, I mean, so, but they're doing it. And I think you can backfill the organization, and they're working on that now.
Let's talk about that then. What you talk about, renewal, revitalization, the sense of bringing health to the presbytery through a network. Because a lot of times, you go, the perception can be, oh, you just care about church planting. You don't care about my church. It's been around 20 years and we're struggling. How did you see the work in Tennessee Valley bring health to an established church that helps promote the growth?
Well, I think you could, better person to talk to than me, it would be like Terry Geiger, who, sat in the M&A coordinator's chair for years and has done so many amazing things, including being an incredibly effective interim pastor multiple places. So he's one of my heroes. If I can just keep following a little bit behind Terry and doing an nth of what he did, I'll be very happy. But Terry made a shift later in his ministry to say, we can't just say the answer to everything is planting new churches. We have to do renewal and planting together. And really renewal is as far behind as Drew is talking about, and he's right. We are with church planting. We're even more behind with renewal. And so I think Tennessee Valley is seeing a beautiful synergy as churches watch. So where are you in Cleveland right now?
Yeah, I'm in Tennessee right
He's
now.
in Cleveland, Tennessee right now, where his son-in-law is associate pastor. That church came to Tennessee Valley M&A when I was serving on the M&A committee years and years ago and said, we need help revitalizing. And we had no concept. We had a great chairman, Dave Marr, a lay leader, ruling elder, and but we had no construct of how we could, it was almost like we were sinning if we're spending dollars for M&A on renewal. And it was beautiful to see how that took root, and where you're sitting now is not just a vibrant church because there was investiture of people and resources and money, but they have a whole vision for micro planning in their place and county, and it's beautiful. So I think people seeing that synergy, so the smallest churches or the hurting churches can say, well, they care about me too, and this is all one part of one fabric, and we're all about the kingdom together. And I think that really speaks.
Yeah, I think of that this way, Chris. Like, I remember when I was planting, reading Tim Keller talk about, how do you both evangelize unbelievers and edify believers at the same time? Well, the gospel is what does that, right? Because what does a non-Christian person needs to hear the gospel, but a Christian person needs to hear the gospel. And so if you're preaching the gospel, uniquely, you're able to do both that sense of evangelism and edification at the same time. So I think of both church planting and revitalization kind of in the same way. Like the things, I really like to think of church planting movements as just being kind of revival movements. Like there's a sense in which there's been a genuine experience of revival that's led to this multiplication. That, I mean, really, I think that's what. So first of all, it's what we're praying for. So the network can be an instigator of revival in the presbyteries, or vice versa, however that works. But I think in many ways, what we're doing in church planting are the very things that need to be recovered in churches to see revitalization happen in those churches. So a network focused on evangelism, focused on genuine movements of prayer among core groups, prayer and evangelism and real, gospel proclamation and all of these things. Those are the things that plant churches, but they're also the things that when they're reintroduced to a local church, are the means of the revitalization of those churches too. So I think it's possible to do both. I mean, I think you are doing both at the same time, all the time.
If I could say something, one of the keywords I think you've used, and we've used it throughout, is the idea of movement. One of the things I allude to in the articles, that book Trellis and Vine. Basically what we're looking at is building a trellis that fits the vine, if you will. Seeing the movement of God and build on those. You wouldn't get that from a program that was foisted on you from above. You get that, I think, by seeing what God's doing where you are, and adapting to that in a way that will, if you will, flow along with and promote that kind of work.
No. Yeah. So what we're seeing and what I'm hearing through is over these, let's say 30 years, that movement from a very strong centralized church planting movement, it was like, look, presbyteries have to own it. Every church planted church, kind of that. But there's this constant kind of synergy, if you will, that goes back and forth, in which we're not wanting to move back to a centralized form, but these networks then begin to the coalescing of the grassroots, saying, okay, what can we do together so that we can do it individually as well?
Networks give you an economy of scale, right? It allows you to do more collectively than all of us could do individually. And I think that's, as Chris, you're involved in ecosystem building with all of M&A across US and Canada. I mean, I think that's where M&A is really crucial, is helping the networks even think about how they can be connected with each other, how they can cross-pollinate, how they can share best practices, how, you don't copy Florida somewhere else, because you're not, what a unique place, what a unique time. It's on fire with demographics. But what are we learning there that's helpful, that can be applied other places? The reason I like Wisconsin so much, yours, is you didn't have a big church. You didn't have a barrel of money. You didn't have a place that the world thought was attractive to go to. You didn't have, but you prayed and you began and you built foundations, you put seed in the ground, and the Lord is just blessing that,
Yeah. And it is exciting to be a part of that. Again, for me, laboring there, we've been up there 34 years, 35, I forget how many years now. Been up there a long time. And in that time, just the slow going nature of it. Our last, church plant that particularized was in 95. Up until 2010 was the next time we actually got a church plant going.
Wow.
We had six churches in 2010. We have 20 now. So in 10 years, it's been over 3 times the growth.
Yeah. One we haven't mentioned right at all, terrible oversight, is Mike Kelly in Pacific Northwest. I mean, I think in their tenure of the 20-something years, over half the churches now in the Pacific Northwest Presbytery are from the movement. It's burgeoning,
So what advice would you give at someone saying, okay, we're interested in starting a network? What's the first thing to do?
Drew, you did it. You go first.
Oh man, I don't. In our system of polity, I mean, I think the relationship between the network and the presbytery is a really, so I would say that's the starting place is figure out what that's going to be, and formalize it and do the work of getting everybody on board and excited about it, because it's not an easy relationship. Okay. It helps if it helps if the network is just one presbytery like on Wisconsin is, right. But man, I feel like before my tenure in the role that I'm in now, I feel like Ed McDougall probably spent the majority of his time just communicating, recommunicating, putting out fires with all of the misunderstandings and the concerns on the part of the presbyteries.
Yeah.
Is this gonna take over presbytery? is this gonna, there are just all kinds of issues there.
Yeah.
So that would be one starting place, I think.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I will say, Tom Wood talks about this. John Smed talks about this. I just think prayer, not to sound, hyper spiritualized, but prayer.
That's right. That was my answer too. Sorry.
No, well, but it has to be. I think if we, Tom Wood just talks about the challenges of networks. One of the first he lists in the research he has done is prayer. We've lost our prayer capacity. We are not a praying people. And when we do pray, we don't know how to pray for mission and evangelism and discipleship. And I'm more convinced of that than ever. Coming into a renewal setting where I am now, we're just trying to focus on prayer first and best. And I think that then other things flow out of that. Your structure is, Drew could not do what they're doing. Southwest Church Planning Network, Bill Thomas and Blake is the chairman. They could not do what they do without all that structure. But if prayer is not underneath it and inside it, and it just doesn't really amount to very much.
Yeah. I mean, the structure exists just to support the vision. I mean, if necessity is the mother of invention, I mean, then I think you got to know what your necessity. I mean, you got to know. I think, Chris, that's what you said about Wisconsin. That's true of Polk County here. I mean, it's just that sense of we don't have in place what we need to meet the challenge of the day that we're facing, and so we got to put something in place. So the other thing I think is just how you get going. You got to know why. You got to know what you're really getting after, and trying to create one of these networks.
Yeah. It's the realization that M&A is not going to come in and save the day for us. And nor should they. That's what we're called to do and be. And to jump in. I see here Jim Hatch mentions it also seems that another essential key is a leader, someone who has a vision, passion, and begins to lead others towards that vision. It doesn't happen by hoping it does. And that gets to Tom Wood's second one, is a visioning capacity. And that leadership capacity as well is so much a part of that.
And I think that can start, I'll just say that, so a lot of times we can think, well, only if I can hire a Drew or a Chris Vogel, can we do something? And I think it starts, there's a priorness to that, right? There's Tennessee Valley. I mean, the real key player there is not Ted Strawbridge, even as great as the work that he did was. I mean, the key player there is really Hutch Garmany, a church planner himself in a rural setting, who is passionate for the gospel, passionate for evangelism, passionate for church planning. And he built a committee then that collectively owned this and prayed through this. And then God raised up people to come in and be more central leaders. But I think you can start anywhere with that leader. If God's putting this on your heart, if you're watching this live or archived, and you're someone who's just sort of dying for this to be in your place, start with your own prayers and start with the Lord to say, well, who might you raise up to be a collective of people who can envision this? Because it's leadership at multiple layers, right?
The challenge can often be it's leadership that's willing and able and desiring to think beyond the confines of their own parish, because we are so busy working in the context of our own church, and there's so much that can keep us busy, and it's great and it's important. We're not diminishing that at all, but you need someone to think the best way I can serve my people is also to see something happen outside.
Yeah. And Jim Hatch wrote back to the panel. So Paul, you're saying Hutch Garmany was the leader, and that's true. So, you might be on an M&A committee. You might be the chairman. You might be somebody in your city just passionate. You start praying and you start gathering people. There are just lots of ways to begin that leadership.
Well, yeah, and it should be said of Florida. I mean, the first executive director for the Florida network was a ruling elder who was a retired business guy who, I mean, completely different set of gifts than I possess. But what the network needed, like the scope of the network, needed somebody who had all of those administrative organizational skills to kind of get everything in place. And then we realized, as we moved along, we needed a different kind of leader. So, I mean, there are different kinds of leaders. And I actually think I really think, at assessment now, we do the whole planter pastor paradigm. And there are some guys who are just more planters, and they're serial planters who, plant church after church after church. And some of those guys would be great. They may not, like, for my story is I'm probably more a planter than a pastor. And so as we transition from church planting to more of a, kind of a more of a established church, I just started to miss the church planting side of things, but I didn't really want to leave my church either. And so this opportunity to be involved in church planting beyond my local church came up, and it's been life-giving to me to be able to be a part of all that church planting stuff. It's made me a better pastor where I am too. So there are some people who have those gifts of wanting to be involved in more than just their local church, like you said, Chris.
Yeah. We have about 10 minutes left, 9-10 minutes left. Let's start dreaming. What can we be dreaming to see where networks can go? Because again, networks are not part of our polity. They're in and of themselves not necessary, that we have to maintain at all costs. So the joy is they were birthed out of a sense of creativity. And so what does this creativity look like as we move forward through the next decade or two? What would you love to see these networks do, engage, operate?
I think Larry maybe, I just highly commend Larry's article to you. I got to, see the draft version as one of his key resources, and it's excellent. I left reading that. I read that article yesterday and just thought, okay, there's a lot happening. There is a lot to celebrate at what the Lord is doing. Larry, I know Drew and Chris would have different kinds of angles, but I mean, what do you dream about when you think about the research that you did?
I think one of the things I think it's sort of the second generation kind of thing. Like, for instance, seeing South Texas, reach South Texas, come out of the Southwest network, and seeing some more sort of localized, the kind of thing like Drew's talking about in Polk County, or seeing more local networks. Even though it's not part of a larger network, Tate's Creek is kind of like that, where there's a local vision. I mean, the key to every one of these, and it's already been underlined, is the leadership. Having a visionary leader that God places in a place. He sees the thing, and he, like you say, Paul, draws people around him to pray. That it just seemed to me like that was the common denominator in all these networks. So I think to see more, to see a lot. The other thing, it's a dream, is just to see the kind of creativity that you see of different networks doing different things. Like I was just blown away, for instance, by the Metro Atlanta Collective and some of the things they're doing, the way they're approaching it. They're approaching it different. One of the things I think I'd like to see is, I hope to see, is more of those kind of things where people say, okay, what kind of new things can we do that are most effective where we are? Those are just some of the things that.
I would say for me, I sort of cut out on a city to city meeting today that our church is part of here at Crossroads LA. And so that's an interdenominational network, right? In movement. But one of the things they're doing, so for a church like ours that's a part of this, is they are offering to us regular training that is not just the downloading of information, but it's a cohort kind of model It's regular interaction that helps us, even though we're a church plant that's 25 plus years old, right? Helping us think about how we continue to be an engine, how we could be renewed and be an engine again for that. And so I think that would be something I would dream about, is that all of our networks could keep revitalizing, as it were, not just the churches that look downward and hurting, but all the churches in life and mission and prayer through that kind of thing. And I think the other thing that I would just pray for, I don't think it's trite, I don't think it's Pollyanna, to say that every church really could be involved in church planting in some way. The smallest church in a rural place really could be part of an affinity network, or could connect with its Presbytery M&A, could partner with the nearest by local church plant and have them come share. There's so many ways to be a part. Could give, could pray, could serve. I just think if we could get that going, if every church was networked in some way to the broader movement, I think that would bring a lot of vitality. So,
and I wonder with the idea of a network moving around and even beyond some of the geographic context. Right now, we're thinking as presbyteries, latching on of networks. You mentioned city to city as an example. It's not geographically based. And so I wonder, even seeing the possibility of growth of multiple networks. We talked about it geographically, Central Florida, Polk County. But I wonder too, of just having affinity kind of based networks too, that, if, rural church planting, it's not the same in the hills of North Georgia as it is in upper Wisconsin, but there are some similarities, some ways of thinking.
It's ironic because even right now, because I saw it posted last night, the rural church planters, Alan Foster, that leads that as part of his role with M&A, are meeting, in North Georgia. And, that's a network, really. It's it's cross geographic. It's cross. And then with that, when and where it's feasible and beneficial, mentioned a little bit, Paul, too, it's just outside of our box and tribe at times, because there's so much to learn out there. We don't have it all in place with everything. There's a larger toolkit out there. And so, I think for our churches, just to keep thinking, how else can express our belief in this connectional aspect of the body of Christ. What do you and Drew dream about before we get off? I want to hear that.
I dream about networks. I love the affinity network idea, like the networks coming together. But I also think the future of everything attached to just the prefix micro too. I mean, I like the idea of just micro networks too. So, I mean, I can tell you the future of our network here in Florida, it's really hard for the guys in Jacksonville to really be interested in what's going on in Naples. I mean, because it's a 7-hour drive. And so our 5 to 10 year goal is that our network would become multiple networks. So, network planting, right? Network planting the way you plant churches too. So, because I can just tell you, there's a different, if I'm really bought into the ecosystem idea. And so if we really want to see ecosystems happen, the ecosystem, it's so much easier to get a genuine ecosystem happening, like here in Polk County, where we can be, we're a 30-minute drive from being able to be together, and we're together weekly, and people from our churches know one another. And so just the more local you become, there's just some really great dynamics. Yeah. So just the multiplication of networks, I think, would be my vision for the future.
Yeah. And I would piggyback on that by saying multiplying, and similar to what Larry was saying, an increased communication between.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we don't get siloed off, that we're hearing, and this is what we're doing right now is part of that we're hearing what is happening elsewhere and learning best practices and being in healthy communication. That's great. Well, thank you so much, guys. It's been a wonderful conversation. There's so much more to think and say about it. On April 7th, The next conversations will be continuing the series Coaching Resilient Ministry for Resilient Ministry with Vinny Torello and Charles Hooper, talking about spiritual formation, coaching in the context of spiritual formation. And so, again, appreciate the time, and join us again for the next M&A conversations.
Thank you, Chris.
Bye.
Thanks, Chris.